Hi, Jamil. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on, Albert. Appreciate it.
Yeah, as probably some of you know, Jamil is the co-founder and CEO of Gamma, one of the leading NFT and ordinal marketplaces in the world. But before we get to that, I'd like to invite Jamil to share with us a little bit about his background, even before you became a founder. Can you share a little bit about that with us and the audience,
Yeah,
Jamil?
for, for sure. Yeah, before starting Gamma, my background was mainly in computer engineering and AI/ML. So I, studied computer engineering at the University of Toronto, then worked for about 5 years as a machine learning researcher and engineer at Apple, mainly on the Siri team, working on stuff like the Apple Watch, AirPods as well. And despite that, my side projects and hobbies had always been in crypto. First in the Ethereum ecosystem, learning Solidity, writing some dApps, and then eventually coming back, I guess, to the Bitcoin ecosystem in 2021 and learning about Bitcoin layers like Stacks, Liquid, RSK, and others.
Okay, interesting. So you said you started in University of Toronto, and then you went to Apple, working on Siri. So I mean, machine learning AI is a hot topic, right? But I mean, can you share with us like how you made the transition to Bitcoin? Like, what was that the moment where you say, hey, I have to uh like you're sort of bitten by the Bitcoin
Yeah,
bug, right? Had to dive in. Like, what was that? Was that pivotal moment, or was there?
yeah, it's interesting. I think I enjoy being in areas where there's kind of disproportionately less attention from, I guess, a more mainstream audience. So when I got into machine learning, it was around 2014. And back then, if you went into ML, it was kind of a hot field. Like the first CNNs on ImageNet had just come out like a year or two earlier. This is when the first what are called like seek-to-seek, sequence-to-sequence NLP models came out. It was quite early and didn't really capture kind of the mainstream attention. And but I sort of had seen that potential, in the field, and it drew me in quite dramatically. So um, that's sort of how I got into ML. I saw like machine translation when I first did my first machine translation course. For example, it was very much focused on statistical machine translation. Like you have all of these rules, you calculate statistics, you try to align, let's say French and English words from different from like a corpus of text and figure out, how do you translate one word to another. And then you look at neural machine translation. It's basically like you just feed in the training data. Here's the encoder, here's your English text, here's your French text, and it sort of learns everything together without these complicated statistical machine translation algorithms. And you can see already the beginnings of like such a strong future when you focus on like end-to-end training of information rather than writing complex rules and hierarchies. Um, and for, over the past few years, I think I've sort of seen the same sort of disproportionate lack of attention on Bitcoin and Bitcoin programmability in particular, Bitcoin digital assets. There's a huge market out there. There's a huge potential for Bitcoin as a store of value for your non-fungible assets, just as it is for your fungible assets as well. And I think you've kind of seen that narrative play out a little bit over the past couple months with the momentum around ordinals, that people are starting to see that value come out and emerge. And so I think it's important to think from like just the core value proposition of what you see, and where those kind of asymmetric opportunities are, where you think that the world is looking one way and you want to look in a different direction, where you kind of see some fundamentals that you think others may not be seeing. So I think that's what sort of brought me into Bitcoin, is kind of that, again, asymmetry, which is flattening out right now, actually, as people start to realize more and more the value of Bitcoin as a store of value for non-fungible assets with ordinals.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's beginning to flatten out. There's still quite a big disparity, right, in terms of that perception, but is definitely flattening out faster than it was a few years ago. And which year did you shift to Bitcoin? Like, is there a year there that like?
So it always been on my radar. Like my first Bitcoin purchase was around 20, again, around the same time I got into ML, like 2014-ish. I remember like the first Bitcoin ATM opened up in Toronto, and that's where, I sort of like I wanted to check it out. I knew it was a thing that was starting to gain popularity, and I just wanted to talk to people about it and see what we're doing. And I never really like bought a significant amount or made any money off of it or anything like that, but that was my first sort of exposure to it. uh, my attention was brought on it again sort of during the NFT bull run, where a lot of people were focusing on let's say speculation on these assets on chains like Ethereum and Solana, but the kind of core value proposition of what you can build with these assets, I think some people were missing. And that's really like where my attention got brought back to Bitcoin. Like, is anybody still focusing on what you can do with Bitcoin, or is everybody focused on the newer smart contract layers?
Right. And which year was that when you decided to take the plunge into becoming a startup founder?
2021. Yeah.
2021. Okay. Wow. So you've had like a very meteoric rise since then, because it's only 2.5, like not even 3 years later, right?
Yeah. I mean, I I think it's like it's a challenge. Like there's still so much that I'm learning, and like jumping in and less than 2 years ago, like I knew zero, like nothing about starting. I
Wow.
didn't know what a safe was. I didn't know like how the fundraising process went. I didn't know like anything, and made so many mistakes too, like early on, in starting a company, like
Right.
whether it's procedural or more like fundamental. But it's I've learned so much, and I think that's the main thing to take from it, is that like you don't really need to have solid background in business or finance or whatever
Mhm.
to jump in and get started. You just need to be able to work together to build cool stuff. I think is the key point.
Wow.
And my first like exposure to, I guess, this side of the world. I mean, it was funny. I was looking through my old emails, and toward the end of like maybe high school, like right before university, that was around when the App Store was taking off and coming out, and I remember getting an iPod Touch for my birthday, and I that's where I first learned to code, was like writing apps for the App Store. And I remember like releasing my first app, which was a very simple app, that just showed you like aviation weather maps. Like, you could see like if you're a pilot or whatever, you could, see what the weather was and stuff like that. And for the first time, it's like, you that was like basically my first job, right? I never made much money off of it, but it was like a way to release stuff to the world and get feedback, get emails from people saying how much they loved or hated the app and like what improvements they wanted. And actually, when I was looking through those emails, it reminded me of even what we're doing now. Like people would have the same problems, the same sort of requests, and I would have to give the same sort of responses. Like, no, this feature is going to be, gonna have to wait to add it, or here's your refund, or here's uh, someone might send an email about how much they like the app or something, and you respond to it. So I really enjoyed that experience of like interacting with people and seeing people use what I built. And I think that that's something that I was craving again when I was working my full-time job, and that I'm getting back into now.
Wow. Okay. And what year was this when you got that iPad as a present and you built your first app and launched it on the
Yeah, I
App
got that
Store?
iPod Touch. It was in 2007, I think, and then my
So
first apps were probably
14,
2008.
two
Yeah,
thousand eight. Okay. So
yeah,
that like 13 years before you started Gamma, basically.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So that was
And
that was
I
like
really
your yeah.
I really didn't know how to code that well. Like it was just like copying and pasting code snippets that I found on like, forums and stuff like that and trying to piece something together. I was just like a kid who didn't know what I was doing. But again,
Yeah.
that I think that shows that really it doesn't matter, how much you know or what experience or, formal education you have. Sometimes you just got to like dive in.
Yeah, no, spoken like a true hacker. And anyone can get started, right? Especially with all the tools and information on the internet nowadays. So between 2008, when you launched your first app that you hacked together and put on the App Store, and Gamma, which is 2021, how many other like entrepreneurial projects did you have?
Not really many. I had done like some side projects, but never anything that made money. Like it might be like a little website here and there, like to that I work on with some friends, but nothing that really I sold or made any money from. Um,
Okay.
yeah, but
What if,
I think it was just
well,
fun to like play around with new tech and even if it didn't like necessarily make any money, to just see what you can do with it. So um, I think once I got into once I started college, though, it was much more like, you just need to focus on exploring like the technology that's out there. And that's when I sort of got more into ML, as I mentioned, which wasn't something that I really tried to like monetize or anything. But just find like a role at a bigger company where I could start applying those skills.
right.
And that's why I jumped into like uh, uh, I did uh, an internship first in that field, and that's how I met some of the people that I ended up working with full time.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I'm actually curious, which year did you graduate? Toronto University,
Yeah, it was 2017.
2017, and you went to Apple. Did you go for like a master's degree or any other learning after that? Were you in Apple
Actually,
in the
like
Silicon Valley, or was
yeah,
Apple? Okay,
in Cupertino. Yeah, I
okay,
actually like after about 3 years of working at Apple, I kind of felt like it's kind of crazy. I never would have imagined that I would ever want to consider grad school. When I graduated my undergrad, I was like, no, nobody will ever in my life convince me to go back to school. Like, I just want to get out of there. I want to start working. I want to do things. And uh, after a couple of years there, I really like I had a much clearer idea of what I wanted to like dive deeper into when it came to ML. So there were like this was in like 2017, right? The Transformer paper came out. They were like the field was moving so fast, and like every year, if you missed like a year of innovation in ML, you were missing like what felt like decades before that, right? I would back then I would read a paper every single day. So I would read a paper in the morning, write a summary of it, and then post it to like a little Notion doc. And I just enjoyed trying to keep up with the research and see what's going on. And I realized that it was going to be I wanted to like get a closer connection to it, to the research and to the people that were actually doing the research. And so that's when I decided that I wanted to do do like a master's in CS and focus a little bit more on AI. And so I ended up uh, uh, getting into the master's program at Stanford for ML. And I started there, like my plan was basically to quit Apple to to do my master's. And they have like part-time an option as well where you can basically like take a course or like do some research part-time. And so I ended up starting that, but at the same time, that's also when I started Gamma. And so I had to basically choose like which one do I want to focus on? Do I want to focus on grad school, or do I want to focus on the startup? And I think it's impossible to like split your commitments totally. So occasionally I had done like one course, in grad school part time, but it's like you basically need to choose. You can't do both. Yeah.
Okay, no, thanks for sharing that. So you basically did the Elon Musk thing, right? He like got into Stanford grad school and then he decided he wanted to run his startup instead.
Yeah.
Sort of similar situation. Yeah, like rather be doing versus like just like more theoretical stuff, right? No, thanks for sharing that. Now I'm really feeling that I'm getting to know you, and I think the audience is also, so I mean, like I think this is natural, right? So what was that deciding factor? Like let's dive into that, right? Because this is a pretty big decision. Like Stanford is not a shabby school, right? It's probably like the top university for a number of unicorn company founders, right? So it's not something easy to walk away from. What was that pivotal moment? I think there must have been like a lot of noise because like if it was like my family or my friends, like, no, do the Stanford thing, like that's a sure bet, like startup is so risky, right? I mean, did you have any of that going on in your life when you make that decision, or was it just like you just knew? And if you did,
Well,
like,
I
how did you
think
know?
the thing that I wish it was something more profound, but I think the main thing that determined what to do was um the fact that there's optionality in one case and not optionality in the other. So, for example, if I want to go like full-time grad school, I basically have 5 years to defer that, right? And I can go back, right? But if there's a moment like when you're doing a startup and there's traction, you can't defer that for a year. You can't even defer that for 2 months, right? It's like you have to do it, you have to capture the momentum like now, right? And you have to, if there's something there, you can't just say, I'm going to put this on hold and then I'll come back to it, right? You have to just say like, I need to commit to this today, right? I think opportunities like that will always be there in the future, and who knows like what will happen to when you're in the startup world. Like things can fail, things can go down, or you can be wildly successful. And I think it's when I look at like this idea of like regret minimization, if I didn't do the startup and I just stayed at Apple or just dove into grad school full time, I would always look back on that moment and be like, yeah, what if I took that opportunity? What if I like did my own thing? What if I started the startup? And so although it's not like it's not like I wish there was like a more rational or profound decision where I was like, no, this is like, like some sort of divine intervention or like some, sort of like intrinsically like profound statement about it, but it was really just about like what decision would I regret the most, and what would I have more fun, and what would I enjoy doing more, and what how can I capitalize on the moment most effectively.
No, thanks for sharing that. Well, no, I actually think it's quite rational to minimize regret because I mean I'm sure it's not psychologically healthy if we start stacking up the regret. And I mean, why live if not to be happy, right? So I mean, I totally like we're speaking the same language here now. Of course, like there must have been like that implies a comparison, right? So you're comparing against Stanford grad school ML, and then you have this new startup, right? And I think you did mention traction, but I mean, like what were the things that you felt that you'd be giving up? Can you itemize those things? If you said like no to the startup, what would you have been giving up or regretting? Like what are the top
Uh,
three things?
hon- Honestly, the main thing, which is hard to like, I guess there are a few things, right? I'm gonna compare it actually to Apple, since that's a or like working at a big tech job or wherever you are, right? Because already I had made the decision to like at least leave that. The opportunity cost there was almost the biggest consideration. Like for a lot of people, leaving a big tech job, whether to go back to grad school or whether to do a startup, they're like equally crazy paths. Like you normally wouldn't consider doing that. And I think that's because there's a couple of reasons. Number one, of course, in the forefront of anyone's mind is like the money, right? In fact, if you're going to leave a big tech company for 3-4 years, you're probably giving up as much as you'd get from a small exit in your startup, right? Like with zero risk or very little risk. Like there are layoffs at these companies and stuff like that. but you basically like have to have quite a good outcome in your startup in order to offset that expected value baseline
Yeah.
of what you're making. And
Yeah.
there's no way like the salary you can pay yourself as a startup founder is like near what you would get paid at a big tech company, right? Like I gave myself like a pretty much 80%, 70% pay cut, right? Like just what I need to basically live in the Bay Area. So I'm not saving anything or anything like that. So the opportunity cost is huge, right? You have to make sure that you're doing what you love in order to make that decision. I think the other thing is like I really um I do miss the people that are there. Like you do realize that a lot of these companies have an exceptional concentration of incredible talent in the fields that you're focused on. So like in ML, in user interface design, in software engineering, and there's just a whole variety of like skill sets that converge in a place like that. So that if you have any question about like anything, you can talk to probably one of the world's experts on that. So like, the inventor of generative adversarial networks at the time was working there, and I could just like talk to him and ask questions or like, learn from people like that. My former boss was like the co-founder of Siri. So, had questions about early Siri and like why it was built this way or how it worked and what his philosophy was on like on AI. And you get these answers from like people that are really eminent in their fields. And I think probably boiling it down, I think those are probably the two main things. I don't even think there's a real third that like even stands out to me. I think it's really opportunity cost and people. And I think there's trade-offs either way, right? Like if you're joining a startup, you're trading off that like low variance outcome for a much higher variance outcome where your outcomes can be much better in the startup world, but they can also be much lower. It's no secret that like whatever the statistic is, 95% of startups fail or whatever. So you've got to be totally ready to say, I'm literally giving up all like 100% or like 80% of my income or like whatever for the next 3 years, and be totally fine with that in exchange for like the high variance outcomes, and that I'm going to get a maybe less of a concentration of like people in a broad variety of fields, and I'm going to trade that off for interacting with like a wider variety of people with skill sets that might differ from what you'd find in a traditional big tech company. And you'll learn different things from different people, right? So it's not like smarter people versus not. It's just like different types of people that you encounter. Yeah.
Well, that does sound like a lot to give up. I mean, let's try to quantify that because I think it's important. So you said 4 years at a strong tech company. And if you have stock options, I'm sort of thinking like the payoff is 7 figures USD, 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it could be easily into the 7 figures,
Yeah.
especially in your field, which is on the uprise. And at a startup, like you said, like if you get lucky, you have an exit, you might make that much. But like you said, it's 95% failure rate, if not more, if not more. I mean, I think if we're at the beginning of a mega trend, I think the failure rate might be a little bit less versus like say
Yeah.
like sort of towards end of the trend where the pickings are much more slim and then everyone the latecomers are trying to jump on. So but that's one. The other thing is, yes, like these big tech companies, they aggregate a lot of talent, right? And there's a lot of resources for the talent to work together and do really cool stuff, right? So I mean, this is a lot to give up for startup. So I mean, like, can we sort of share like what was your startup when you had to make the decision, like, am I gonna stay with Apple and go forward with Stanford, right, graduate school, or I'm just gonna go all in on the startup? Like, what stage you'll start with that?
I think, well, I'd like not making, revenue or anything, but at least, like when STX or like a small amount. We're basically like we're at the position where knew where the opportunity was, had like, done a little bit of a side project, showing, NFTs on a profile. It had gotten attention from people in the ecosystem. Users really liked what they saw, and it was at a point where, I knew there was something there because people were using it and people liked it. And I think that's really the only the only quantifiable metric for whether something is valuable in a startup. Like you could
How
raise
many people are
$100
using
million.
it?
I think at the beginning we probably had like a couple hundred, users and tens of thousands of views. That's like not a big number, but it's enough to know that like, hey, with like a little bit of effort, you can get people to use your product. And
Yeah.
I think there are companies that even, raising a lot of money that struggle to find happy users or find people that enjoy using it. And I think that was really kind of the differentiating factor.
And how much time did you spend on the side? Because you're working at a full-time job, right? And it sounds like you're almost doing this as a hobby and then you got traction. Is that, am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. So most of the
How
work
much time
like
is,
was
yeah, after
just
work?
like
Okay.
evenings and weekends and stuff like that. It's like not
Wow.
not a lot of time at all to get something like basic up and running. Now, if you're like building a team or you're like doing something more complex, then of course that's going to take a much bigger time commitment. But that
Were you
wasn't.
just one person starting that in the beginning, or did you already have like somebody
Yeah,
like,
I had a friend
yeah,
that was like helping out on some of this stuff, but it was mainly just myself.
wow, that's not easy. Like basically nights and weekends. So if we had to quantify that, about how many hours a week did you put into this, and for how many weeks in order to get to that traction? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, like it's kind of a joke within the company, but it's kind of true. Like the first version of the site, like the very first, like where you just type in a BNS name and see your NFTs, was like mostly written on a flight to Miami. Like I was just taking a trip, and it was like, just hack something up together and just like ship it. It's not gonna be perfect. It's not gonna be like great, but it'll be there. And then once you get that out, you can start iterating on it. I mean, there were certainly points in time, especially, you know, um, after like starting this full time, when literally like even without the full-time job, like I would get no time at all to do anything else. I remember like 7 days a week, like 12, 14-hour days, basically. It doesn't sound like you think, well, what am I doing for all of that time? Well, it's just so much like operational work, support work, feature work. Everything happens so fast and you have to be on the ball all the time. I remember like I wanted to go to like an event with one of my friends. It was like an air show, and I wanted to take like 3 hours on the weekend to go to this air show. Right, I just want to take 3 hours, go enjoy the air show. I remember being so stressed about those 3 hours. I was like, I need to find one of my friends to like sit down at the computer, watch, make sure nothing goes wrong, like call me if there's anything that happens, right? Like I had my terminal set up on my phone so I could like SSH into the server and fix something if anything went wrong. But like it was at the point where if I wanted to take 3 hours to just hang out with a friend, I had to like, I was stressed about that. Like I was basically at my computer all day, every day, just trying to focus on getting this thing working. So, it certainly like it certainly was a lot.
Wow, wow. So I mean that that is I like that little story you just shared with me. You wrote the first version. Like talk about lean, right? On the flight to Miami. So I'm guessing it was like Cupertino to, or San
Yeah,
Francisco
SF.
to Miami.
Yeah,
Is that like
yeah,
a five? How many hours is that? 5 hours,
yeah,
six
like five
hours?
5 hours. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay. So so it doesn't take much to get a startup started. But I mean, at that point in time, did you even think that it was going to evolve into a startup?
No, it was just like I
Okay.
wanted to
Yeah.
learn, and I really like I was just curious, right? And I wanted to figure out, how these things work. And I also like I think the other thing was like I was personally frustrated at the situation in the ecosystem where I couldn't, like everything was like a silo. Like if you bought an NFT on one marketplace, you could only see it there. I bought like I had a BNS name, I had like some NFT I bought on one marketplace, I had an NFT I bought in another place, and I couldn't see those three NFTs in one place, right? Like I just wanted a wallet, like where I could see my NFTs. And so it was just personally frustrating for me not to have that. I didn't care about the UI. I didn't care about like all of the fancy features or marketplace or minting or smart contracts or whatever. I really just wanted a place to see those three NFTs. And so that's basically what the MVP was just a place that I could see those NFTs. Now, I'm sort of like, it's a bit of a hyperbole to say that was all built in the 5-hour flight. Like the what I came out of that flight looking at was very ugly, right? It was like the three NFTs, but they didn't, like, it was a horrible looking website and stuff like that. But it was a point where I was like, okay, I could go from 0 to what I wanted, right? Like this is basically the information that I wanted to get. This is the architecture of like how the website's going to work. And I can sort of see how this could evolve into something that's like a usable product by people.
Yeah, and then so this is in 2021, right? So let's
Yeah.
fast forward to today. Because I mean, I still have some questions to ask you about what the biggest challenges were to getting to where you are today, but maybe it's a good time to sort of it's good to have the juxtaposition. Like back then, flight to Miami, like
Yeah.
hack together a website in a few hours, right? To show your three NFTs in one place. And then now what has evolved to today? And can you sort of share some highlights on where it is and what value it creates now?
Yeah, I think back then you can think of like, I think these markets as sort of like concentric circles. So back then it was like, how can I build the best thing for the Stacks community, right? I'm building on Stacks because I love Bitcoin, but really I'm building like for this group of people that also loves Bitcoin, that's in Stacks because they want programmable Bitcoin. And I'm like, how can I build the best product for this group of people, right? How can I fit the existing needs of the market? How can I fulfill the existing needs of the market? How can I alleviate those pain points? Like for example, back then the marketplaces were charging like 40-50% commissions to artists to launch their work, and we were like that's simply not tenable. Like that's a pain point for creators. Creators shouldn't be giving up half their livelihoods to a middleman, right? So we have to figure out what the best way to alleviate that pain point is. But they're basically like, you're looking at this market and saying, how can I alleviate all the pain points in it? But it's still a market that has a certain size. And in the Stacks market, I feel like you're also trying to find product market fit for how do you become a broader programmable layer for Bitcoin. The Stacks market cap is like a certain percentage of Bitcoin market. And I think now the questions are less about like, how do you take a single market and sort of dominate it or grow and gain market share? Because we were really like in a battle between three marketplaces for market share, right? Eventually, like we started off with 0, and now we're like 95% plus market share within that market. But now it's like the the questions are different. It isn't just like, how do you alleviate pain points in an existing ecosystem? It's like, what are we doing to actually change the way that digital assets are represented on Bitcoin? How do we serve the Bitcoin market as a whole and use all of these things as tools to push that broader goal? Like Stacks is a tool basically to enable Bitcoin digital assets. So I think that's a broader question, is like, it's less about specific product and features and stuff like that, and now it's more about how do you actually grow the market, and how do you build a product for a much broader problem, and those are more like strategic questions and long-term vision, rather than just like nailing down each problem and just hitting them one by one, right?
Okay, so let me unpack a little bit and let's put that in perspective for the audience. So about 2 years ago, you built this, you hacked together the beginnings of Gamma on a flight to Miami. And I'm emphasizing 2 years ago. And back then you joined Stacks because Stacks is a great community who wants to create programmable Bitcoin. By the way, this is not for the conversation for today, but yeah, there is going to be some pretty big alpha coming on Stacks in terms of that programmability on Bitcoin coming up pretty soon. So you guys could look that up after this interview with you. But I'm talking to the audience, right? Of course. But going back to this 2 years, you had zero market share, right? And 2 years later, you basically dominated the Stacks NFT space at probably 95 or even more percent, right? And then because you've already like sort of grown out of this pond, you guys, if I understand correctly, you guys also activated ordinals, right? Is that correct? So
Yeah, that's right.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like that evolution, right? It's amazing. I mean, that's the amazing thing about being an entrepreneur and taking that risk, right? You like 2 years before, it's like you wouldn't even have imagined where you are today, right? And things can happen like that fast, right? Especially when we're at the beginning of a huge trend, which like I think you said it very nicely. It's like basically Bitcoin is finally programmable, right? It's finally programmable, right? So how does that, like evolution from, okay, dominating the NFTs on Stacks, and now you guys are one of the front runners, one of the first people to activate ordinals, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about the functionality on that?
Yeah, so I think
How
it also
creators could, yeah.
brings up one other point, which I think is interesting, is like as a founder, you're basically your only job, your main job, is to prioritize and focus. And at the beginning with Stacks, right? It's like, okay, profile view, creator tools, marketplace, right? Like clear path, right? And then now, during the bull market, and during the bear market, when things slow down, people are tempted. Am I going to jump ship to another chain? Am I going to do something else? Am I going to pivot? Am I going to like try to hedge my bets on different chains to figure out, well, one of them might succeed. But I think like you really do have to stay convicted and not get distracted by other things. And if you're going to get distracted, or if you're going to like switch your focus, you have to really like commit, right? To say, now I'm going to do this, right? And all of those decisions should be served by a broader, like higher level idea. And ours was basically, there's an asymmetry between what people are doing on Bitcoin and Bitcoin assets and other chains. Like people aren't paying attention to Bitcoin digital assets. And so any decision we make is sort of like influenced by that premise. And so like jumping to another chain like Solana or whatever just doesn't make sense, right? It's not where we see the like asymmetry. It's not where I feel like the team can be most effective. And so you really like
backwards.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like you really are just being opportunistic at that point. And I'm sure there are ways to make money, but honestly, I feel like if you take that approach, you're always going to be behind, right? You're always going to be chasing whatever is popular. And by the time you can build something, it's already going to be too late. So when we were building on Stacks, one problem that we had was that we wanted to be much more integrated with the L1. And there are plenty of ways to do that on Stacks, right? To help be integrated with help integrate more with Bitcoin. But that was basically our problem. We're trying to figure out like, how do we unlock Bitcoin liquidity and open up the market, put these, assets directly on Bitcoin, and then maybe bridge them to Stacks or whatever. And so when I heard about ordinals, I was like, this is perfect, right? Like this is exactly a way that we can start to do things on L1 and preserve our optionality in the future for L2. And so it was almost like a gift, that just fell in our lap, right? When ordinals came out. And so I knew like immediately, as soon as I heard about ordinals, I started syncing my node, getting the ord indexer up and running some test inscriptions. So like the first Gamma test inscription was like, I think number 669 or something like that,
Wow.
like quite early on, like
3 million or something.
Yeah, 3.5 million. Yeah.
So 600. That means like what was that the end of January? Like we're
Yeah, like
600.
end of January, or like maybe the first couple days of February. That
Yeah.
that
Okay.
time was crazy. Like it
So
was
you
like
were on
everything
this
was,
like the first 10 days it was launched.
yeah.
How did you find out about it so early, by the way?
I don't
I
even
mean, it's
know.
still
I think
early
I
now,
saw it
but that was
on
like
Twitter.
super early.
Yeah, I think I
Was it
just saw
like a
something
tweet
about
or
it on
did
Twitter.
someone tell
Yeah,
you? Oh, it was on a
yeah,
tweet. Okay, wow.
it was on a tweet. And I'm like, okay, I just got to play around with this and figure out what's going on. And so it wasn't just like trying to jump on what's popular. I didn't know that ordinals would be popular. If I knew ordinals would be popular, I'd be much more rich now because I would have inscribed a ton of shit, right? But I didn't, right? I only made like 2 test inscriptions sub 1K. So it's kind of funny. Like I'm not like a crypto degen or trader. I'm like horrible at that stuff. Like if I was a smart trader or a smart degen, I would have like inscribed as much stuff as I could back then, but I didn't, right? I was just focused on like how can we build stuff for ordinals. And so we basically
But hold
like,
on, The trade-off is that now you have one of the biggest ordinals trading platforms. Is that correct? Like what is it? There's a trade-off there, right? There's like a
yeah,
big trade-off.
yeah. So like I guess focus on building the inscription service in a way for people
Yeah.
to like, it was hard for me to make those test inscriptions, right? Like I had to basically take like a full 24 hours to get a node synced, get ord synced, which took another 24 hours, and use the command line, transfer BTC, know how to use ord and stuff like that. So that was another thing that was like, after doing that, I realized there was a pain point, right? Of this is hard to do. And that was through my own experience with making an inscription. So it was pretty clear, like, hey, there's an opportunity here where we can make it easier for people to make inscriptions. And that's basically what we launched about, I think, 2 weeks, maybe a week and a half later. So we really like just dropped everything. Like you have to make sometimes in those calls in a startup where you're like, you really just have to drop everything and go. And so that's what we did. We like said this is going to be our focus now for the next 2 weeks, and perhaps longer. And even if it's a flash in the pan, or even if it doesn't last forever, I think this is a big enough opportunity that like, hey, digital assets on Bitcoin are becoming a thing, right? In a mainstream way. And so that's really what it was. And it's the same goals of like alleviating pain for creators, making it easy for creators and users to get what they want to get done easily and without being ripped off, right? Like the average cost to make an inscription before Gamma launch was from $150 to $400 per inscription, right? When we
And what is it
launched,
now
which was
on Gamma? Yeah. What is it now?
right now on Gamma, it's free. When we launched, it was
Wow.
$5, right?
Wow.
So at least for single inscriptions, it's free. If you want to do bulk, then we charge a small, like 10% fee of the miner cost. But I think that shows like, look, we know that the value that we're providing, like we want to make it easier and more accessible for people to make these inscriptions. And I think if you focus on like how you're going to help your users, how you're going to help creators, if you align incentives between like, if the creator succeeds, the creator is happy, then we're happy, then I think you really align the incentives for the long term. You don't want a situation where your users feel ripped off or the users feel unhappy when they pay that amount. You want to align incentives such that they feel good about using your product and you feel good about them using your product. And I think that's when you get the confluence of product market fit.
Wow. No, well spoken. So let me just repeat that for the audience and make sure I got it correctly. So if we inscribe one ordinal, it's free, right? Gamma doesn't charge anything. We just pay the normal the fee to the miners, right? And then, but if you want to do bulk, if we want to do bulk, then you charge only 10% of the mining fee.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow. So like, what does that compare to like what other people are doing?
But I think now the costs have come down, right?
So
like
you
once
like
we
help
launched,
drive it down.
right? Yeah. But we're like I'm not even gonna like focus on a market war, right? Like I don't wanna
Yeah,
like if
because just fast
competition
forward
is doing
today.
like if the competition is doing $200, I don't want to do like 195, right? I'll just like bring it down to its logical conclusion. And it's the same thing with the single inscriptions, right? I think that's not a defensible market. Like you want to be able to provide value to users and creators that goes beyond just creating a single inscription. Early on, it was valuable. Early on, it provided value to users. But now there's so many different ways you can do that. There's like, people will get their own nodes running and people will, figure out ways of doing this. So you want to create tools that provide something above and beyond what just people expect. Like, for example, one thing we launched was collection mints for creators. So creators don't have to now pre-inscribe their entire collection and pay all the mining fees. They can set up almost like an ETH style mint where they upload the images, they don't pay anything up front. And then when users go to mint their collection, the user pays the inscription fee plus an amount to the creator, right? And so the creator can like sell their NFTs in like a mint, their inscriptions in like a mint procedure. And I think that's something that provides value, right? Like it's not something you can just do off the shelf. If you wanted to do that yourself, it would take days, if not weeks, to get set up. And so we're trying to provide value where this is like a pain point, and it would be extremely onerous and difficult for a creator to get that set up themselves. So we'll allow you to drag and drop images, and without talking to anyone, without doing anything, you can get that set up. And I think that's like the sort of stuff that we want to continue doing, is like, how do we provide outsized value to creators and to users?
Well, that sounds like really, really convenient for creators. I mean, it's like almost like turnkey with zero code. So that, I mean, what's can you share with the audience the website?
Yeah, sure. It's if you go to gamma.io, you can see both inscriptions available for secondary purchase, as well as being able to create your own collection mints, your own bulk mints, your own single inscriptions. You can do that all on gamma.io.
Yeah, I've tried the single inscription one, and I'd have to say it's much easier than launching your own node and all that stuff. So great job there, Jamil. Now, we're almost coming up on time, so there's two other things I want to talk to you about, because you know, I love how from almost zero to product market fit, right, in 2 years basically, or maybe even a little under 2 years. Um, what were the first topic I want to talk to you about is, what were the main challenges that you wish you had more help with the first year, right, before you reached product market fit? Like, what were the toughest things for you? Maybe like if you share that, people can avoid those pitfalls. Um,
Yeah, I think probably the main things were just figuring out like how to set up and run a company, and everything around that, right? Like fundraising, like logistics and stuff like that. And luckily my co-founder, Nick, he's like great with that sort of stuff, like legal issues. We have great lawyers, we have great, counsel, operations, HR, payroll, all of that set up now. But that's definitely not in my wheelhouse, and it's intimidating, and it's a lot, to first get started, and it's a lot of overhead too. It's a lot of work when you should be focusing on product, both the operational side and the fundraising side. So I think that's a big area where I think, going back, if I'd start from scratch, we would have been able to move a lot faster now with all of the learnings that we've had in the past. Hiring has actually been better than I expected. I imagine that to be like a pretty difficult process, and at times it has been. But I think when you have like a great user base and a great set of people that like your product, you'll find people that are passionate and want to work for your company. And I think that's been good. Like almost all of our hires have come from people that have either reached out to me that I know personally. Our latest hire, our designer, worked at a Bitcoin company before, had stumbled across Gamma, so he knew about us. He knew about our product offering and like what we were doing. So it's like I think it's harder when you have to build a team before building a product. But if you start something yourself or start something small and get users, then I feel like hiring almost happens very naturally, as you realize what you need, as your company grows, as your technical demands grow, and you have a pool of people that do want to work with you, and improve the product.
yeah, no, that's great advice. I mean, like, don't overthink it, right? A lot of people try to form the team first, but the reality is that we don't really know who we need until we're in the mix, right?
Yeah.
And then Yeah, and on that point, how did you meet Nick? I'm just curious.
Yeah,
You
so
said
there's a funny
yeah.
story. He in early on when we first launched the creation tools, Nick was one of the first creators that approached me about launching his collection on Gamma. And so, I wrote the smart contract and like help him get set up with the mint and everything like that. And he minted out, and he had a successful mint. But afterwards, we were talking, and he was like doing competitions and doing like Twitter growth and stuff like that. And so he was offering a lot of suggestions and advice on how to focus a little bit more on marketing and growth and stuff like that. And so we ended up just, working more closely and closely together until basically we both, quit our, he quit his job as well and basically just jumped on board.
Super, super. No, I love how like that relationship organically formed, and you guys had time to work together and to feel each other out. No, that's a thanks for sharing. So maybe to wrap it up, what are some, what like think, because like look, we're hoping to attract more people into the greater Bitcoin ecosystem. So together we can build a sustainable Web3 Bitcoin economy. And as you mentioned just now, Bitcoin is becoming more and more programmable. Stacks and other market leaders are making sure of that. And so there's even more opportunity now than 2 years ago. So, if you're like, say, what would you say to entrepreneurs, like sort of like, should I go here, should I build there, like, what are some things that you can help them with to help make that decision easier and making the plunge into being a founder?
Yeah, I think honestly being totally honest with yourself about what you care about and where your values are. And I think this is what's great about building in Bitcoin is a lot of people feel very strongly about the principles of decentralization, of trustlessness, of basically building things the right way and looking towards a future that you genuinely believe in and that you genuinely want to see. And I think that's why Bitcoin attracts so many principled and strong builders. Is because of that conviction. You want to truly believe in what you do, and because if you're doing a startup, it's a risk, right? And there's opportunity cost, and you want to make sure that you're really doing something that you truly believe in. And I think if you have that mindset, and you have the mindset of you're going to build for your users, you're going to make something that people want, make something that people want to use, then it all flows naturally from there. And you really just got it. Like there's gonna be no moment where it feels right instinctively. You kind of just have to like dive in and do it, right? There won't be a moment where you're like, is it really time for me to do this? Is it like, if you're asking those questions, you're waiting for like a low risk opportunity, and startups are not low risk. You have to just dive in and say, I'm going to accept this risk. I know what I'm giving up. I know what the outcomes are, and just dive in and build something. And I think the satisfaction of seeing the feedback from your users, building something that people want is immeasurable.
Super, super. Thank you so much, Jamil. And again, this is Jamil, CEO and co-founder of Gamma. Super awesome platform, not just for creators to create NFTs and or node connections, but also for degens. I've been known to degen on Gamma from time to time, several times. It's a great experience. So be you degen or be you creator, check out gamma.io. I think you'll be pleased to find some of the things that they've created, and stay tuned for a lot of the cool things that are yet to happen, right? And on that note, maybe can you share like some alpha? What's coming out later on this year? Like what's something that you're really excited to share with the world?
I think we're focused more on like right now there's still so many limited options for creators to launch their stuff on ordinals. And so like there's no great trustless auctions platform. There's no great way of doing, mint pass in a generalizable way or whitelist. And so we're looking at features that just basically bring that functionality that creators are used to on other ecosystems and just bring that directly to Bitcoin. I think that's where the potential in ordinals is. It's this you just have to make things easier for creators and easier for users, and we're just building features that try to do that.
I'm excited. I'm excited because it's almost like a no-brainer after the fact, right? It's like the same JPEG. If you inscribe it on Bitcoin, it's going to be more valuable than if you did it on Ethereum or IPFS. It's like, at least in the fine art category, it's definitely like it's a no-brainer that, hey, if I'm going to be like top notch collection or something, the top is a key word, then I better be on Bitcoin, right? So
Yeah,
and
and
you
you've seen
guys,
that play out. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, what I so that, so I mean, okay, I promise you, this is the last question. So if this is the same, this is what happened with ordinals, right? Like well, obviously it's better on Bitcoin, right? What are some of the other Web3 categories that you think will just like after it's done, people are like, yeah, that's a no-brainer, right? Like this should have been built on Bitcoin in the first place. Or put another way, it's like, oh wow, everything on Ethereum was actually an experiment, so we can do it better on Bitcoin. What are some of those things that what are some of those categories?
Yeah, I think, and you've seen this play out a little bit in the ordinal space right now, but one of the things that's interesting is like when we launched the ordinals inscription service, people weren't just minting NFTs like PFP collections. They were inscribing like, we saw people, one of our first bug reports, I always give this story, is like someone said my text is too big, and it's failing on Gamma. And they were inscribing like George Orwell's books on Gamma. Right? Like, who would do that on Ethereum, right? Like, who would inscribe 1984, or who would create mint and like it just doesn't make sense, right? Like, why would you do that? But as soon as you do it on Bitcoin, what you're doing is like as soon as you inscribe that data, it's on everybody's node. And so this provides a great way of saying, like, at this moment in time, this is what this text said, this is what this image was. And you can preserve that for all of history. And I think this is one of the areas that's being kind of underexplored in ordinals right now, is this idea of like a permanent time chain or a permanent store of very like low size, but very high importance information. So stuff like, verifiable, uh, like verifiably, like at this moment in time, this person said this, or this is what the news article said, or this was the text of the book. And there's been no way really of preserving that information in a trustless and secure way. And I think this presents an incredible opportunity. And it's not just thinking about like secondary trading. It doesn't make sense to secondary trade this inscription of 1984, but it makes total sense to inscribe it to preserve it for future generations.
Yeah, no, things that are close to our heart are very valuable. I mean, even I think if a parent was to inscribe their children's drawings, right,
Yeah.
on something, the first choice would be an ordinal on Bitcoin.
Yep.
Like, right. I mean, it's our offspring's like art, right?
Yeah.
It's like so it's actually quite amazing the cultural shift and what it means like psychologically to people at the core. So thanks so much, Jamil, for
Thanks,
for
Albert.
building that functionality, right? And making it easier for creators and also collectors and degens, etc., to be able to access these new digital artifacts. And guys, everyone in the audience, gamma.io, GAMMA.io. Okay. Thank you all for listening, and we're looking forward to the next alpha, where we're going to reach out to you again, Jamil, for chapter 2 of this saga.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Albert. Yeah, appreciate
Thank you.
everything.